So welcome to the next session of Young Climate Champions. I am going to be the speaker today. So I hope you're excited. So I'm going to be teaching about traditional ecological knowledge and ethnobotany. This session is going to be a little different from our other sessions because we're going to have the first half be me presenting, and then y'all can ask me questions. And then the second half, we are going to talk about your final project and then make our groups for your final project. So let me share my screen. Oh, actually. Okay. So before I get started, does anyone know or have any idea what traditional ecological knowledge is? And you can just come off mute because I can't see you all. Any ideas? Seems people shake their heads no. Okay, so this will be new for everyone, it seems, and that's great. This is something I love talking about. A little bit on my background and why I'm the one teaching you about this. In college, I studied agroecology, and then when I graduated, I worked as an apprentice at an ethnobotanical garden in Maryland, which is where I'm from. And this garden was run by James Duke, who is pretty much the most famous ethnobotanist there is. He created the world's largest ethnobotanical database. So if I'm saying a bunch of words you don't know, don't worry, I will explain them soon. So let's get into it. So what is traditional ecological knowledge? It is often abbreviated into TEK. People call it TEK. TEK is a set of principles and practices to tend landscapes. This wisdom has been built over thousands of years of indigenous people living with the land. Therefore, it is highly local. So while the principles may be similar across peoples, the practices may differ. So what works for Native folks in the Florida Everglades does not work in the Sacramento Valley. And I want to stress that this system of knowledge was created by indigenous people, and since then there have been other sciences that have been created based off of traditional ecological knowledge, but they do not have the thousands of years of history behind them. So let's actually talk about the history a little bit. So for 10,000 plus years, Native people have been learning from and living with the land, creating biodiversity hotspots and shaping cultural practices. And then, of course, we had the arrival of missionaries and settlers, which led to the violent removal of nations from their ancestral lands. After that, ecocide became the norm. So extractive capitalism destroys sensitive ecosystems, exploits vulnerable populations, and incentivizes a culture of hyper-consumption. Because those people were moved from their lands, the biodiversity hotspots that they were tending are under attack. And many of those hotspots are powerful carbon sinks. So before I continue, an example is the Amazon rainforest. Somebody come off of mute and tell me if the Amazon rainforest is naturally occurring or if it became that way because of people tending the land. Just give me a guess. Come off mute, somebody, or I'm gonna start calling on people.
It's naturally occurring.
Okay, I heard Suri, you said naturally occurring. And then Rania, what was your answer?
I'm also gonna guess naturally occurring.
Okay. I understand why you might think that. It's like this massive, massive span of land. However, the Amazon rainforest is that way because humans have been living in the Amazon rainforest and tending it for thousands of years. So there are hundreds of native tribes that live across the Amazon. The Amazon spans multiple countries. It is a immense rainforest, and people have been living there for millennia. And during that time, they learned how to work with the land. They observed the land, and then through that observation, they figured out the best ways to continue tending it. So they saw what plants grew really well together, what plants don't grow well together, what sort of vines need to be pruned, and what they can do with the pruned vines. They can make baskets, they can make clothing. So the Amazon rainforest is, as we know it, the world's largest carbon sink. And it is that way because people have been co-evolving with the plants there for thousands of years. And so it's a very similar system with California. When the settlers came to California, they remarked that it looked like a well-tended garden. There's writings from the settlers from Spain saying that it looked like a well-tended garden, and they didn't understand why. How could something that's naturally occurring be well-tended? Well, it's because people are tending it, because people are working directly with the land and stewarding it. So a lot of places that we have considered to be naturally occurring, they actually have had humans working with them. And in many cases, humans were removed from that land, and so they were no longer being tended correctly, which is the case in California. So when the Spanish colonists came to California, they noticed that the California natives were using fire as a way to tend the land. So we talked a little bit, when Cal Fire came to talk with you all, we talked a little about controlled burns and cultural burns. So California's landscape evolved to work with fire. There are certain plants whose seeds will not germinate if they have not been exposed to fire. Certain trees that will not release their seeds unless they're exposed to fire, like pine cones, for example, they have to be exposed to extreme heat to release the seeds from the pine cone. So there's all of these fire adapted species that we have in California. And when the Spanish colonists came, they outlawed fire because they were scared of it. It had only been a force for destruction for them in their cultural context. And coming here and seeing natives use it in a way they didn't understand, they outlawed fire. So for about 400 years, fire was not allowed in California. And in all that time, we started to see a buildup of fuels. So the things that the cultural burns were doing, it was reducing all of these, the buildup of all these fuels, all of these like small young trees, a lot of like leaf litter and shed bark, things that catch fire really easily. And when a wildfire happens, they spread so quickly. So the purpose, one of the many purposes of California natives doing those burns was to tend the land. So they would reduce the amount of fuels, so they would reduce the risk of wildfire. And the ash from those plants would also enrich the soil and help other plants grow. And then, like I said earlier, there's plenty of species that only release their seeds when they're exposed to fire. So for 400 years, the California landscape did not have fire. And in that time, we have had our most catastrophic wildfires in history almost every year. And so only recently is the fire service, so Cal Fire and the US Forest Service, the state parks, are recognizing that we do need fire. We need good fire. That's kind of the term that's used for it. And so good fire is being brought back to the land. And luckily, there have been partnerships between California natives and state and federal agencies to bring good fire back. But it has been kind of contentious, because when they started doing when like state agencies started doing controlled burns again, they were kind of forcing natives who have been doing this cultural practice for thousands of years. They were forcing them to like go through Western controlled burn training, even though all of the knowledge that they had about that came directly from natives. Luckily, they're at a better place with it now, but it's definitely an uphill battle. So native activists have been fighting for the protection and return of their sacred lands as long as they have been removed from their lands. So while there are some successes, such as the undamming of the Klamath River, it is an uphill battle. The US government rarely respects treaties. We're relatively lucky in California that sort of mainstream thought is moving towards respecting native perspective and seeing traditional ecological knowledge as a valid science. But it's been a very long time. We are in the year 2025, and we're only just now thinking, wow, maybe we should listen to Indigenous people who lived here for thousands of years before anyone else. And like definitely have a better perspective of the land, because their generations and generations and generations of their people have lived with this land and are very familiar with it. So on most of these slides, I have recommended reading if you want to learn more about what's on the slide. So my recommended reading for this is Whereas by Layli Long Soldier. So that's a book of poems about the United States government disrespecting treaties with indigenous people of the United States. It is oftentimes heartbreaking, but if you like poetry, I highly recommend it. And then if you want to learn more about the history specifically, I recommend An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Any questions before I continue? Okay. And like I said, you can just come off mute because I can't see you all. So if you do have a question, either raise your hand or just come off mute. So what sets TEK apart from Western science? Western science sort of makes you the observer. You are like a passive observer of nature. You're not a part of it. Whereas TEK recognizes that we are a part of nature. So we live in an anthropomorphic world where humans are at the very top of the pyramid and everything else is below us. But TEK is an ecocentric. I said anthropomorphic. Anthrocentric is when humans are at the very top. Ecocentric is when it's a flat plane and everybody matters the exact same. So like we have the same inherent worth as a butterfly or a blade of grass or a river. Humans do not have any more or less value than other living beings. In TEK, there is often a belief that plants and other living beings are our relatives. So there is a more spiritual aspect to TEK that Western science oftentimes looks down on. And that's one of the reasons why it's been so hard for Indigenous scientists to be taken seriously, because it's not just a science in the way that Western science is. Western science is very cold and clinical, and we're just going to look at the objective facts. Indigenous science has been forged over thousands of years. It is significantly older than Western science, yet people look down on it as it's some kind of like woo-woo hippie thing, despite it being significantly older than all Western forms of science. So despite Western science's attitudes towards TEK, it is a valid science that has been slowly gaining recognition. So like I said earlier, in California, state and federal agencies have been partnering with tribes to host controlled burns. TEK is a valuable system of seeing and working with the land that has been forged over millennia of actively participating in nature. So what are some of the benefits of working with TEK? Well, I talked earlier about biodiversity hotspots. So as you may know, the world is very quickly losing its biodiversity. Even the Amazon, which I talked about earlier, is under attack. So the Amazon, despite being the world's largest carbon sink, is now getting to a point where it might start creating carbon instead of binding carbon from the atmosphere. And that is because the Brazilian government has been leasing off parts of the land to like ranchers. So they cut down the forests and then they let their cattle graze there. And so all of the thousands of years of tending and like really specifically deciding what to plant where is being thrown away for cattle ranchers. Brazil does have the highest number of consumption of beef of anywhere in the world. So it makes sense that they have so many cattle ranchers that they literally are cutting down the Amazon to feed the cows. But it's also being sold to American and Canadian and Chinese paper companies. So at this point, profit seems to be of more worth than binding carbon from the atmosphere and reducing the greenhouse gas effect. So soon enough, the Amazon will become a producer of carbon instead of a binder of carbon. And part of the issue with ranchers taking over the Amazon is that the native peoples that live there are under attack. So many of the ranchers have a blank check from the government to kill the indigenous people that are living in the Amazon. There are cases of only one person remaining from a tribe. Entire tribes have been wiped out. And so we are seeing a very real impact. As soon as we lose these land tenders, more carbon is being found in the atmosphere. So traditional ecological knowledge does have a really important place, especially as we are trying to fight climate change as much as we can. And so the Brazilian government is moving backwards in giving up the Amazon to companies. The Amazon should be returned to all of the native peoples who have been stewarding it since time immemorial. There are certain places in the US where land is being returned. I mentioned the Klamath recently. The Klamath River was undammed. So one of the keystone species, which I'll talk about keystone species in a little bit, but the idea of a keystone species is that it has value and is important to every level of the ecosystem it exists in. So salmon is a very culturally important and very ecologically important species for Native Californians, Native Pacific Northwesterners, people in Alaska. Salmon has a very, very deep spiritual meaning, and it is also incredibly important to the environment. And so, unfortunately, because of all of the dams that we've built over time, the salmon can't finish their life cycle. So salmon usually lay eggs. They're born in a river, and then they swim down to the ocean, and they spawn, and then they swim back up to the river that they were born in, back to their like spawning place. But because of all the dams that we've built, that pathway has been blocked. And so there's been a lot of people that are trying to remove the dams. And one of the like biggest wins in history of like something like that happening is the Klamath Dam was torn down in the last year and a half, and salmon are already returning to the environment there. So that's really important. If you want to learn more about traditional ecological knowledge principles, I recommend reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And then just to like break down sort of the principles of TEK that you want to take home with you: reciprocity, respect, and stewardship. So can anybody tell me what reciprocity means? Like reciprocal. What is a reciprocal relationship? Okay, I hate to say it, but I'm gonna start calling on people, so prepare yourself.
I might know. I don't know.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I was just thinking maybe like giving back the same respect or protection that something would provide you.
Yeah, that's a really good definition. So reciprocity is the idea that it's a mutual relationship. We're not just taking. The earth provides us everything we need to survive, but we shouldn't just take, because our presence on the planet, we are taking resources, but we also need to be giving back in some way. So natives all over the world have worked with the land for food, for shelter, for textiles, for building materials. And it's not just taking, there's also a respect. Like I said earlier, plants and wildlife are often seen as relatives. So it's not just, I'm gonna cut this tree down or cut this entire forest down because I want to build a house. It's what resources do we already have access to? What can we use that is not going to be devastating to this ecosystem? And then how can I harvest in a way that things will continue to grow? So sustainable harvesting is a huge part of being a TEK practitioner. You're never going to be taking all of something. You want to make sure that it's coming back in the future so that if someone else needs it, and also just so that its population can continue to grow. So that's what reciprocity, like it's a mutual relationship. We are both benefiting. So there are a lot of plants that need human interaction to continue growing, or they benefit greatly from it. Like blueberries, for example, blueberry plants like to kind of get jostled around, and it mimics like a bear like grabbing a bunch of berries. So when people harvest blueberries, they like use this it's like a comb that like scratches up the leaves and it harvests the berries at the same time. So that's an example of a plant that like benefits from human interaction. A lot of plants, they need to be pruned. They will continue to grow until it's like super messy. There's a lot of like reeds that people use for basket making where the dead bits will just stay there. And that's because somebody should have been harvesting it to make baskets or something else of that nature. But because so many people have been removed from the land, a lot of the things that were previously tended are going untended, and we have a lot of unhealthy forests and landscapes in California and around the world. In some places, there's like a resurgence of Native folks tending the land and also trying to bring back Native foodways, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But yeah, the second principle that I want y'all to take home with you is respect, which we kind of touched on. So like I said, it's like seeing nature like your family. You don't want to disrespect your family. You can see like your friends, your family, whatever makes the most sense to you, but you're not going to go and like slap it across its face and then walk away. Like a lot of people sing to the plants, a lot of people talk to them, they do rituals. There's like a very spiritual aspect because they all have their own energies. You can see each plant as its own unique entity. I definitely do. So I learned TEK for Northern California from my friend Evan, who's Pitt River Maidu. Pitt River Maidu territory is like around Mount Lassen area and Susanville. A lot of like Northern California TEK practices can be really similar. But I do want to stress that it is a very regional practice. So what we do here in Northern California is very different from what we do in Southern California or like on the coast because the landscape is different. So on the coast, people harvest a lot of like seaweed and kelp and things like that. They harvest oysters and clams. They eat a lot of fish. Here, we don't have seaweed and kelp. We have a lot of edible plants that grow in the Sacramento Valley. It's a very abundant place. But yeah, we're just doing different methods that reflect our ecosystem. So being really aware and being observational of what is around is really helpful in informing how you practice TEK. But I do also want to stress that this is a knowledge system that is also very special to the tribes. So Evan gave me permission to teach because his elder was like, all people need to know this knowledge, it doesn't matter. But there are also tribes that do not want to share this knowledge with people, and that's something that we need to respect. So keep that in mind. And that's why we're going to talk a little bit about ethnobotany, because it's a more general approach that is like accessible to all people versus TEK, which is kind of a cultural resource where each tribe has the ability to say whether or not they want to share it with outsiders. Final principle that I will share with you is stewardship. So that just means that the way that we're working with the land is really important. And we are treating it like an ongoing relationship. You don't just go to the land one time, pick a few flowers and leave. You have to keep coming back. It's an ongoing relationship. Because if we're seeing these beings as family members and friends, you don't just talk to them one time and abandon them. You need to have an ongoing relationship, especially if you are taking from that environment. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. So I mentioned ethnobotany. Before I do, does anyone know what this plant is on the right? It is a iconic native plant to California. It grows in the Sacramento Valley. Any guesses? Seeing some no's. Okay, well, I will circle back once I tell you what ethnobotany is. So ethnobotany is an interdisciplinary field that studies the ways people have co-evolved with plants over time. It catalogs the relationships between people and plants for food, medicine, building material, textiles, and spiritual practices. It has elements of anthropology, history, and botany. There's also a more general field called ethnobiology that studies the way humans interact with other aspects of nature, such as wildlife. There's also ethnomycology, which studies the way that cultures have interacted with mushrooms. There's so many niche forms under the umbrella of ethnobiology, and the one that I have studied is ethnobotany. And I do know a little bit about ethnomycology, but not very much. So it's important to note that ethnobotany is a Western academic approach to an indigenous science that has existed for millennia. It is a relatively niche field. I am hoping to get my master's in ethnobotany, and there are currently only 2 universities in the entire United States that offer a master's program in ethnobotany. One is at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which is probably where I will be going, but I'm not ready to move to Alaska yet. And then the thing is, if you go to school to study ethnobotany, most likely you will be taking an anthropology class or an anthropology major, and then there's like 1 or 2 classes in ethnobotany. It's usually just sort of like a subject that you study once or twice as a part of a larger anthropology major. Many indigenous scientists have gone the route of studying ethnobotany because TEK was not considered a valid science until very recently. Oh, have a question? Yeah, what's up, Ella?
I was just wondering because I've like looked into environmental anthropology and biological anthropology and how that kind of differs from ethnobotany.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so ethnobotany is like very specialized. Environmental anthropology has more broad strokes. You could be talking about plants, but a lot of times you would be talking about how people lived in the landscape from a larger ecological lens outside of just botany, because botany itself is already a very specific field. Like you can study biology in school, and which, hey, if anyone wants to do that, I highly recommend. You have to at least be okay with doing math. So there's that part. But you could major in biology and then specialize in botany. There's just so much science attached to botany itself that it kind of has to be its own thing. So environmental anthropology, I would say, is wider, and then it has a larger focus on like anthropological practices. So you might end up doing like digs, for example. Um, in ethnobotany, I have never done any like archaeological digs or anything like that. And then what was the other field you mentioned?
I think that was it. Thank you, though.
Okay, yeah. Um, they're all fascinating, and honestly, if you're interested in ethnobotany, it might be a better route to study environmental anthropology because you will find more professors, you will find more studies, you'll find more people that are doing it. Ethnobotany, despite TEK having a huge resurgence around the world and native perspectives of nature becoming significantly more uplifted in the mainstream, it can still be difficult to find stuff about ethnobotany. Um, However, I do heavily recommend that if you are interested in ethnobotany, going directly to indigenous ethnobotanists. So I mentioned Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer earlier. She has been instrumental in bringing TEK to the mainstream for people to understand its importance. Her book Braiding Sweetgrass like won a bunch of awards. It is still a bestseller like years after it's been published. I highly recommend reading that book and learning sort of the axis where science and spirituality meet, because that is kind of the difference between one of the many differences between indigenous and Western science. And then another indigenous ethnobotanist named Enrique Salmon created a book called Iwigara, American Indian Ethnobotanical Traditions and Science. That's a really great book as well. It's more structured like a field guide, I guess. And they go by region. So it's not as like specific as ethnobotany of Northern California. It is across North America, not all, but many of the plants that folks work with from different tribes. But it's a really good primer, a really good introduction to learning about how people have worked with plants. So we've been talking around plants, but let's actually talk about plants now. So one of the most important plants to the California landscape is the valley oak. The Latin name is Quercus lobata, and that means that it has lobe leaves. If you get into botany, you're going to have to learn taxonomy, which a lot of botanists complain about, and I could complain about for hours, but we don't have time. So yes, the valley oak is a keystone species, which I mentioned earlier. They are foundational presences in the landscape. So if you were to remove this species from the California landscape, so many systems would collapse. The valley oak hosts over 4,000 different species of plants, animals, and fungi. So a valley oak tree in itself, you could think of like a high density apartment. There are so many different systems existing within this one tree. They provide food, shelter, nesting materials, shade, and more. There are certain species that only will lay their eggs on valley oaks. There are a lot of like wasp species. Oaks are super cool, and if you're interested in harvesting acorns to grow more oak species, the Sacramento Tree Foundation hosts acorn harvester trainings. And I went to one and it was really fun, and they are trying to grow 1 million more oak trees in the next 5 years, so you can be a part of that. They usually post their trainings on Eventbrite. You can go to the Sacramento Tree Foundation website as well to see what other stuff that they're doing. So I mentioned it. Oop, picture not showing up. Oh, well. So I would love to hear what people's thoughts are in response to this question. Can you eat acorns? Are acorns edible? Yes or no? Seeing people shake their head no.
I've heard like them putting it in syrup and like grinding it.
Okay, we have a yes.
I think it's
Yeah,
edible
I've
too.
heard about it being eaten before. Yes.
Okay, more people saying that they're edible.
I think it's edible, but I don't
It
think
tastes really
I
good.
eat it. I've tried it before.
Maybe it's edible because I know chestnuts are edible, and I feel like that's a close relative to them.
Yeah, they are super similar. We actually do have a tree in California that is related to the chestnut called the California buckeye. But all the people that said acorns are edible, you are correct. So you could not just eat it straight off the tree. I mean, you could, but you might get sick, so I would not recommend it. So there is a very long process that goes along with eating acorns, and acorns have been a staple food to Native Californians for a very long time. It's not as common in the diet as it once was, but oftentimes during ceremonies and celebrations, acorns are consumed. So I actually have a clip from a documentary where somebody is talking about acorn processing. So first, let me give you background on this documentary. It's called Tending the Wild. It was made by PBS SoCal, and they have an hour-long documentary where Native Californians themselves are talking about working with the land, resurgence of Native foodways, fighting for land rights, fighting for protection of sacred lands. And it is a very good documentary. I highly recommend. And then after the documentary came out, they also made a show where they expanded on a lot of the concepts that were discussed. So you can watch all of this for free, which is amazing. You just have to like watch a commercial or two. You can watch all this for free online. So it's called Tending the Wild, and I will in the like summary email that I send tomorrow, I'll make sure to include this. But we are going to watch a North Fork Mono woman go through the process of tending acorns, and she's going to share a little bit about current perspectives from Native Californians on acorns.
Food is one of the most intimate ways that we relate to the environment. When settlers first arrived in California, they were really concerned that California and the environment and what they ate would change them somehow. Later, as they tried to clean the landscape, to produce food, to create modern agriculture, vegetable products, we began to conceive of our bodies as separate from the environment. Way boy, leonani o leonino. Way boy, leonani o leonino. Hey anane, hey anane, hey anane, oh hey anane. I just fell in love with this song. It's just an acorn processing song. It's a Paiute song from the east side. The Paiutes on the east side loved acorn, but they don't have acorns over there. That's why we traded back and forth. That's the reason we filtered over the mountains and ran the Chukchansies off of their land, is because we wanted the black oak acorn, and we had to have it. Acorn is a pure living food. If you're putting something that sacred into your body, man, you're putting life into your body. I know the power of acorn. Our men were long-distance runners, and they would just have a little fanny pack and put some of those konawoys, those dumplings, in a pack, maybe with a little bit of jerky, and then run to Bishop. There was some form of acorn processing going on every day in the village, because for each person in the tribe, it took approximately 1,000 pounds of acorn to sustain one individual for a year. This little rock here can be made out of granite. Usually it is. It's called a Pessoa We'inu. But I love doing this the traditional way. I've tried using hammers to crack and shell. The Pessoa We'inu is the best way. Soapstone is extremely, extremely hot. And what happens when it goes in that basket with that acorn, what it's doing is roasting the acorn. And you can actually see that acorn brown in that basket, and it just brings out the richness of the flavor. You cannot get that in a pot. You just cannot, because a pot can't get as hot as this soapstone. I've got these things so hot when I put them in a basket, it actually scared me. So you want some really good chica onos. Chica onos are stirring sticks. And so you want some good strong ones, and you want to be ready for action, and you better be strong. And our grandmas were really strong. There's maybe 5 of us in the North Fork area that gather acorns, and we can't even find enough for ourselves at this point. A long time ago, there were more oak trees. A lot have died, a lot. My grandmas would not allow their environment to look this way. They're gonna either cut trees, prune them. When they would go through, they're gonna burn. Their number one thing was their oak trees. And that sustained not only them, but the squirrels, and the squirrels provide for the other animals. So we're back to balance. Now it is totally out of balance. If you don't use something, you neglect it, it goes away.
Now, in an interesting way, we're coming back to the idea that worried the first settlers, that the environment can affect and change us. We no longer think that it might be best if our food is produced in these ultra-clean, monoculture, vast fields under sterile conditions.
California is a big agriculture state. We produce a huge amount of the fruits.
Okay. I just wanted to show you all that one section, but I do highly recommend checking out this series. And like I said, I'll send the link to it tomorrow. So getting back to the presentation, does anybody have any thoughts on what we just watched before I keep going? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ethnobotanical resources that you can access if you want to learn more about this. So first, I'm going to show you a poster. So there is a woman, a Mechoopda Maidu woman that lives up in the Chico area named Allie Meters Knight. And she is such a force of nature. She runs an organization called TEK Chico, where she teaches anyone who wants to learn how to do tech for that region. And she created this informational poster that not only talks about the plants of riparian ecosystems, but also some of them have the Mechoopda names. So it's like the names that Mechoopda folks would refer to these plants as. So before I continue, let's talk about what a riparian ecosystem is. We have a lot of them here in the Sacramento Valley. A riparian ecosystem is the area immediately around a stream, creek, river, or any other type of natural waterway. So here in Sacramento, we literally have 5 different rivers converging in one place. So we have a lot of riparian ecosystems here, and they're incredibly important to the rest of the ecosystems of the region. And so they have different zones as they like start up in the foothills. That's a whole area of oftentimes like oak woodland, and then we have upper and lower riparia. And all of these zones have different plants that are really important. A lot of them are medicinal or edible. And so this looks like a lot of information. I'm not gonna like read you every plant on here, but it is really fascinating. And they're color coded. Let me see. So the legend here, if it's blue, it's an herb or a flower. If it's green, it's a tree or a shrub. Oh, yeah, it's green, it's a tree. If it's purple, it's a shrub. If it's light green, it's grass or ground cover. Light blue, aquatic grass. We have vines, and then they have the tribal name that's in Konkawi Maidu. So as you see here, they have a list of like keystone species in each area. So there's many other things that grow here. I'll zoom in.
Is there supposed to be a map? I don't really see it.
A map?
Yeah.
So no, it's not necessarily a map. It's more so a guide to plants that you would find if you were to walk through this area. So, for example, you could go to the Casumas River Preserve. You could go to Auburn Recreational Site. There's so many riparian zones. Unfortunately, like in the city proper, we don't really have any remaining like biodiversity hotspots because they've been paved over. Old Sacramento, that's like right on the river and like the waterfront, would have once been a biodiversity hotspot, but it's not anymore because we've paved it over. Were you raising your hand, Lynn Marie?
Yeah, I can't really see. I still see your like Canvas slideshow.
Oh, huh. That's weird. Sorry
That's
about
what
that.
I meant.
Oh, okay. Here, let me. Sorry about that, folks. You should be able to see now. Can everybody see the poster?
Yeah, we can see the poster.
Okay. So yeah, like I said, it sort of goes through the different zones of a riparian ecosystem and the plants you can find there. So many plants. A lot of these are edible as well. For example, Western redbud, you can eat the flowers. Toyon, humans don't eat that as much, but a lot of creatures do, four-legged creatures. And people have historically worked with the wood to make instruments like flutes. Manzanita, milkweed, gum plant, yerba santa, those are all edible or medicinal. So is yampa and biscuit root. So it's really valuable, especially I think a lot of people are like returning to learning about the earth because there's like a fear, like, am I going to have to build an off-grid commune someday with the current political system? So I think a lot of people are returning to the earth as a teacher, which is really valuable, but it's also important to go at it with respect. And also know that you should probably go with somebody who knows what they're talking about. There have been people in recent times that have been using AI generated identification guides and field guides and getting really sick. There was a family that got an AI generated mushroom identification guide, and it told them that one of the most deadly mushrooms in the entire world was an edible mushroom, and they all ate it. And luckily they were able to go to the hospital and get their stomachs pumped, but they were incredibly sick and nearly died. So you really want to go with somebody who has experience with the landscape and knows how to identify plants and mushrooms, especially if you're going to be trying to eat them. I don't want that to scare you away. It is really rewarding to build a relationship with nature. No matter what your background is or where you come from, your ancestors likely had some kind of relationship with nature. And it can be really healing for a lot of marginalized people, people from underrepresented communities, to rebuild that relationship with nature on their own terms. So I did want to circle back to this because I didn't tell you what plant this is. So just double checking, can everyone still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is a manzanita. Does anyone here speak Spanish? Anybody speak Spanish? Does anyone that speaks Spanish want to tell me what they think manzanita means in Spanish?
It might have something to do with apple.
Yes. Okay, we got 3 answers at once, but yes, everybody said apple. So yes, it means little apple. So these flowers that you see here turn into berries and they look like little apples. And so that's how they got the name. And this is another edible California plant. And this plant grows all over the place. So you may have seen this before. This might look entirely unfamiliar to you, but from here all the way up to like southern Oregon, southern and central Oregon, this plant grows. And there is a long history of people eating this plant. So I will say they taste really good, but there is a giant seed in the middle, and it can be kind of grainy. So some people make wine from them, or like they add it to their acorn mush. Because like that's one of the things people eat with acorns is like kind of a porridge, and sometimes they'll add berries to it, and oftentimes manzanita is one of those berries that's added for extra sweetening and nutrition. So back to resources. So I'm going to tell you about Calscape, and then I need to wrap this up because I'm a little long-winded here, but Calscape is a really, really important database that was created by the California Native Plant Society, or also known as CNPS. So Calscape is the most exhaustive database of California native plants that exists. There is a very dedicated group of people in California that care a lot about native plants and about bringing native plants back to the landscape, because they recognize they're so much better for like drought resistance. You don't need nearly as much water when you're growing native plants because they evolved to live in this landscape. And because California is a place that is often in drought, many of the plants that are native to here require significantly less water than like ornamental plants that don't come from California. So as we're trying to become more water wise, especially like looking at water shortages and, you know, just climate change, that's one reason. They also are much better at binding the soil and reducing like the soil being depleted. So that, and then they also increase biodiversity. So just a little walkthrough of the website. You can go to the native plant database here, which is the main reason I use it. And they have nearly 9,000 entries on here. So it might be a little overwhelming at first. This is just kind of like going into it, you might be looking for something specific. So for example, let's look up Valley Oak and see what it says. So this is the plant we talked about earlier, very important keystone species. So first it tells you that there are 52 nurseries carrying it. So if you want to start your own native garden, you can come here and it will tell you where to get the plants. And then it shows you where it is growing. So as you can see, all over California, very important species of the California landscape. And they give a little description. So it is the largest of North American oaks. It ranges in the hot interior valleys of California, grows very quickly. So yeah, there's lots of information here. And then you go down to the bottom of the page. And then for people that are gardeners or wanting to start their own native plant gardens, this is where the especially important information is. So it'll tell you the type of plant, the size, the form, how fast it grows, all of that, and then go further down. So landscaping information. So it needs full sun, low to moderate water, summer irrigation. So max 2 times a month once established. So like I said, that might seem to gardeners like that's not a lot of water in like a drought-stricken state. But like I said, these plants evolved to withstand drought. So once their roots are established, they are accessing water underground. They do not need to be watered very frequently. So that's really important information for gardeners. I myself am planting a native food forest in Sacramento, and I have been using this website a lot for my research and just for my like landscape planning. It also tells you how to propagate. So if you want to grow more of it, it tells you how to do so, what kind of soil it likes, what kind of like drainage the soil needs. So there's a lot of really, really helpful information. And then it also lists companion plants. Can anybody tell me what a companion plant is? Any gardeners in here?
Do they like complement each other and help each other grow better?
Yes, exactly. So companion plants are an example of symbiosis, which if you take biology or have taken biology recently, you may have learned about symbiosis. So this is a reciprocal relationship, companion plants. They both help each other in some way. So this is a list of companion plants that work really well with oaks. You will also find them commonly if you go to an oak woodland, you will find these plants growing around them. And then they have profiles about all of these companion plants as well. They talk about the wildlife that this plant supports. But yeah, so that's an example. And then you can also do garden planning, and they changed the website recently, so I don't exactly know where it is. I think it's going to be here. So they have a garden planner. So if you are very passionate about increasing biodiversity and becoming water wise with your gardens, you can put in information about where you're growing your garden, answer a couple questions, and it will create a garden design for you. So we're going to do this together. What should everybody tell me what I should select? Are we doing a low water garden? We're doing easy garden, pollinator priorities, or like more birds? What kind of garden do we want to make?
Pollinator.
Oh,
all right.
Pollinators.
Okay, so yeah, you can select multiple, but just to keep this simple, we're going to focus on pollinators. So how much sun does the area we're planting our garden get? This one, I feel like I'm just going to select one, but we're going to say partial shade, just like a little bit of everything. And then we need to select our region. And we are in the Sacramento Valley. Okay, and then our garden inspiration. So there are so many different landscapes in California that we can take inspiration from. And then what we want our garden to look like will sort of decide what plants we have. So our options are chaparral, which is oftentimes in like desert adjacent areas like desert valleys, coastal scrub, desert proper. We have forest and riparian, which we talked about earlier. We also have meadow and grassland and woodland. So somebody choose what our garden inspiration is. What's calling to you?
Meadow and grassland.
All right, here we go. So our garden is ready. So from those questions, it has come up with a whole list of plants recommended. And if you click on each one, it will tell you where you can find it. It's taking a second to load, so it'll show photos of everything. So based off of wanting to do meadow and grassland, recommending all of these really important native plants. We have the elegant Clarkia, purple Chinese houses, turkey mullein, prickly popcorn flower, rattlesnake weed. Yeah, so this is a very long list, so I'm not going to scroll through all the way, but the other part about it is that you can see the garden design. So it actually created, like, based off of our answers, this is what it's telling us we should do to design our garden. So this can also be a really important tool to share with like your family members if they're trying to update their gardens to be more native gardens. I would always recommend a native garden over a lawn. Lawns suck up so much water. They do nothing to support the local wildlife or pollinators. And oftentimes there are a lot of pesticides that are poisoning the local ecosystem that go into lawns. So this is a significantly better for the environment option. So if any of y'all are interested in planting your own native gardens, I am a permaculture instructor as my side job. I teach people how to create native gardens. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me outside of this. Does anybody have any questions about Calscape before I continue? Okay. So we are coming to the end of the presentation here. So I shared some resources with you, and then I just have further reading if you would like to learn more about this. One second. So a lot of these books were written by California natives or folks that work very closely with California natives. So we have We Are the Land, A History of Native California, California Through Native Eyes, Reclaiming History, Settler Cannabis, which is about how the cannabis industry has been really destructive on native landscapes, California Indians and Their Environment, an Introduction, and then Trust in the Land, New Directions in Tribal Conservation. And then just another suggestion, if you're interested in learning more, the Maidu Museum in Roseville has a lot about traditional ecological knowledge that the Maidu folks have done. And there's a lot of different like regional parts of Maidu, like the Maidu Nation. So like I mentioned earlier, my friend is Pit River Maidu. There's also the Nisenan Maidu, the Mechoopda Maidu. So a lot of like very regional groups. And so the Maidu Museum kind of talks about that. And then at the California Museum, which is like downtown, they also have an exhibit about Native Californians. It's all right. I would say if you don't know much about this, it's a really great introduction. I would highly recommend checking it out, especially if you want to learn more about Native Californian tech practices. So that is the end of presentation. We are going to transition, but I do want to leave room for questions if anyone has any questions. Wow, it was just so good that I answered every possible question that anyone could have ever had.
What
Okay.
got you so interested in ethnobotany?
So I have a chronic illness and I was having a really hard time getting like good healthcare. And so I decided that I was going to try and learn how to do like alternative medicine. And so I started by learning herbalism and like I wanted to learn a lot about medicinal plants because I also have other friends that are chronically ill and they have also had a hard time with the Western medical system. And I really liked the way that like ancient herbal medicine systems look at the entire body instead of just like looking at the symptoms. The Western medical approach is very symptoms based. It's just like, oh, we're going to fix just this one thing. We're not going to look at the root cause. But I really liked how looking at the root cause was sort of like the central part of a lot of like traditional medicine. And so that's what got my foot in the door. And then I was already like working on farms and stuff. And so it just kind of like crossed over really well. And then I grew up in Maryland where we have this like big ethnobotanical garden. And there was an opportunity for an apprenticeship there. And I worked there and I learned about over 350 different plants from around the world and their ethnobotanical uses. So that's kind of what got me interested. And then I also am just like very outdoorsy, like tree hugger kind of person. And so a lot of the people that I ended up around when I moved to California were also outdoorsy tree hugger people. And a lot of my friends up in Chico were California natives that really embraced my desire to learn about how to best tend the land and were willing to teach me, which I'm very grateful for. And so my friend Evan's elder has, before she passed away, sort of passed on this like final wish for people, for her children to spread this knowledge because it's incredibly important for all people. So I was one of the people that Evan passed that knowledge down to, and now I am also trying to spread that wealth of knowledge to other people as well. I actually, outside, like I mentioned, I'm a permaculture instructor. Outside of this, I'm starting an outdoor education school for underrepresented people to learn Afro-Indigenous ecological wisdom. So I do teach like workshops and stuff. I teach like edible plant walks and like how to make dye from plants and things like that when I'm not working for Cal Center. So it's kind of just my entire life at this point. It's like all I do is hang out with plants. It's a lot of fun though, because they're very nice. And I also have become the person in my like friend group, whenever somebody sees a plant that they don't know, they like send me a picture and they're like, what is this? And I would say 95% of the time I know, so that's cool. I think there was also a desire to like, oh no, if society collapses, like what am I gonna do? And like what is my role going to be? And my role is going to be the one that like knows how to survive if we get lost in the woods, because I know all of the plants that we could eat and all the plants that we can like build a shelter from and stuff like that. So it is also a way of like contributing to my community and teaching other people to be able to contribute to their communities in that way. So long-winded answer, but there you go. I'll take one more question if there is any, and otherwise we need to move on to finish up.
What's permaculture?
Okay. Yes, I should have said. So permaculture is, well, first let me say what it isn't. So it is kind of the opposite of agriculture. agriculture is very like straight lines and like controlling nature, forcing nature into boxes that humanity creates. And agriculture, industrial agriculture especially, has been one of the biggest contributors to climate change. So that's horrible because we need to feed people, but there has to be a better, more sustainable way to do that. And that's what permaculture is. So you can consider permaculture like another like white academic form of traditional ecological knowledge. So basically, two Australian guys came up with the term permaculture in the 70s. A lot of the practices and principles come directly from traditional ecological knowledge, but they have the same mindset that this knowledge needs to get to people no matter what. And unfortunately, in the world that we live in, people are way more likely to listen to white Australian academics than to Indigenous people. So people have learned a lot about these practices through permaculture, which ultimately is a good thing. But the unfortunate part is the people that should have been profiting off of this and benefiting from this weren't. But I teach permaculture from a decolonial lens. So sort of removing the colonizer attitudes that are a part of permaculture. Also, I'm on the clock still, so I should probably not be talking about decolonization. But if you're interested in like taking one of my classes outside of this, you can let me know. Or if you want to volunteer, because we're, like I mentioned, I'm installing a native food and medicine forest in North Sacramento, and we will be having volunteer days to have more people join and help us install the forest. And so that's going to be at the International Garden of Many Colors in North Sacramento. So if you're interested in volunteering, I can't give you credit for this class for it, but you know, it's always fun to meet other people that care about the earth. So yeah. So once again, long-winded answer, but basically permaculture observes nature and tries to mimic natural cycles instead of trying to force nature into like human ideas of what it should and shouldn't be. So we have a little form for y'all to fill out. It's the same like survey that you did at the end, like the Mentimeter poll. So let me pull it up. So you are going to go to menti.com and then enter this code at the top. Actually, I can post this in the chat, so let me do that. So if you click on that link, it will bring you here. And then we will go through this quickly. Okay, I like that. It's important to remember where our roots come from. How much things we've taken from natives and how much helpful things they've given us. Absolutely. Yes, they actually good. Sometimes technology isn't always the answer to our problems. Land sold and returned by companies involving corporations. The importance of being aware of natives. We are only temporary stewards of our planet. Permaculture. Native plants are very helpful and we should try to use them in our communities. Well, thank you all for answering that. We're going to move on to the next one in the interest of time. What is one action you're going to take after this session? Showing cowscape to the school garden club, learning more about TEK and ethnobotany. Ooh, making a native plant garden. There are a lot of organizations that donate native plants to schools, especially. So whoever said they're gonna ask their school about putting a native plant garden, you can reach out to me and I can share some resources with you. Learning more about plants in case society collapses. Yeah, sorry if I scared anybody with that. It's a very real fear. Educating more about these things in their daily life. Plant native plants in the backyard. Track progress of environmental movements by governments in the news. Learn more about native plants. Check more local sources of food like farmers markets. Yeah, the Saturday farmers market is the top rated farmers market in the entire state of California. It is the #1 farmers market, and it is also nationally recognized. So go to the Sunday farmers market. Also, I know EBT isn't coming through for the month of November. Hopefully it does in the future. But if you're on EBT, they have something called market match at the farmers market. Well, they will match what you take out as like farmers market cash up to $15. So you will get 15 extra dollars to spend at the farmers market if you use EBT there. So something to keep in mind. Hopefully EBT comes through soon. Also, if anyone's on EBT and needs resources for finding food, you can reach out to me. Deeper dive and learn more about plants. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide. So this is a more broad question. You can answer related to the presentation you just saw, but you can also answer just in general, what is one environmental issue you want to educate your community about? And this is how we're going to form groups for the final project. So while you're answering, I'll tell you a little bit about what that's going to be. So we are going to be having an Earth Day celebration in April, and a part of that, it will also be like graduation. And so a part of your like final project is choosing an environmental issue that you are going to teach the community about. So that will be tabling about it. You will have a sort of like setup if you're giving out flyers or if you have a presentation. And then you're also going to have to speak about it to the audience for 5 to 10 minutes. And we're going to be doing groups of 3 to 5 people, depending on what the issues y'all say are. So we have one about the overuse of water. Is that right? Sorry, your faces are in front of it. Yes, the overuse of water, trash pollution, plastic pollution, ocean acidification, food waste, plastic, impact of non-individuals, awareness and education. Okay, we have multiple people saying food waste. Okay, I'm seeing some connections here. So we have multiple people saying pollution and food waste. Water and ocean acidification can probably get partnered together. And then education, individualism, that's definitely an issue with climate change. We need to be more collective in our movements. Stewarding and restoring. Yeah, restoration is really important. More stuff about garbage and pollution. Okay. What is the best way to do this? Okay, so I'm gonna have you text in the chat which of these things you said, and then I'm gonna pair you up. The pairing up, I will send an email because we only have a few minutes left, but just really quickly, everybody in the chat, the same environmental issue that you submitted here, send it in the chat. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm using the free version of Menti, which means I can't see like people's names, but otherwise that would have been significantly faster. Okay. Pollution, food waste, individualism. Okay. Garbage. Okay, and then also the groups won't be formed because we had some folks that missed today, so we will have to have another conversation. So keep an eye out for an email next week talking about this, and then start thinking about how you would want to talk to people about these things. Okay. Right, we're missing like 7 answers. All right, 6 more people need to put something in the chat. If you didn't put something in the chat, you will probably be getting a strongly worded email from me. I'm just kidding. I try to be nice over email. So that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And I hope you feel inspired to take some kind of action in your community. Like I said, if you have any questions about making a native plant landscape at your school or home, you can reach out to me because that is my other job. So I am pretty well versed in doing that. Otherwise, make sure to keep an eye out for reminder emails that will be coming out soon. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. I am setting you free. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Nice day,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.